Have you ever looked at a beautifully designed home and thought, why does this look so good? Obviously, we all have different tastes, but there's plenty of psychology and science behind what makes certain homes feel so good to be in. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to harness that psychology to upgrade your own home without renovating or even buying new furniture. So picture this. It's Saturday afternoon and you just spent 2 hours deep cleaning your living room. You vacuumed the rug, you wiped down the coffee table, you fluffed the pillows, and everything's in its place. So you sit down on the sofa to enjoy your hard work, but you can't, because even though the room is spotless, something still feels off. Like there's this low-level hum of restlessness in your body, almost like the space is quietly shouting at you. And that's frustrating because you put in the work and you've got nice things, but the room just refuses to feel like the sanctuary you want it to. Well, here's the thing. The reason it still feels stressful usually isn't due to your paint color or your layout. It's because you've fallen into what I call the visual to-do list trap. And to understand why your clean room is still stressing you out, we have to look at a quirk in human psychology called the Zeigarnik effect. Back in the 1920s, a psychologist named Bluma Zeigarnik was sitting in a busy cafe and noticed something interesting. The waiters could remember complicated orders perfectly without writing anything down. But the second the table paid for that order, their brain basically deleted it. Ask them 5 minutes later what that order was, and they legitimately couldn't tell you. And what she went on to prove through her work as a psychologist is that the human brain is literally hardwired to remember incomplete tasks way better than completed ones. Because when a task is unfinished, your brain keeps it in active memory, which creates this subtle cognitive tension so that you don't forget it. But how does that show up in your living room? Well, your brain doesn't just evaluate your room based on color theory or aesthetics. It also scans for pending actions. So when you sit on the sofa and look toward your TV, you might see that black power cord drooping down. Now, consciously, you know it's just a cord, but subconsciously, your brain sees it like a sign that says, fix me. But this shows up in a lot of areas of our lives. The stack of mail sitting in your entryway isn't just paper, it's a pending action. The cabinet door cracked open because something's blocking it, that's another. And the throw blanket that's half falling out of the basket, that's a third. And so each of these tiny things is an open loop. And you can think of it as having 50 tabs open in your browser. You might only be using one of them actively, but the other 49 are still running in the background. And that's what these little visual hiccups do in your home. Your brain is silently tracking unfinished business all day long, which makes it next to impossible to relax. So the fix usually isn't buying new decor. The fix is what I call closing the loop. And this is very different from cleaning or tidying, because when you close the loop, you aren't looking for dust or reorganizing your bookshelves. No, you're putting on a pair of psychological blinders and walking through your room looking strictly for one thing: unfinished business. And then you finish it. So that might mean taping that drooping power cable to the back of the media console so it disappears, putting the mail inside a drawer, or just rearranging what's inside the cabinet so you can finally fully close it. That's it. You're not redecorating, you're just Xing out of those mental tabs and really closing the loop. And the crazy thing is, the before and after might be something as small as one visible cable, which is completely insignificant on paper, but emotionally, it can be huge. Because when you close that tab, your TV console stops looking like an electronic storage unit and starts looking like a thoughtfully chosen piece of furniture. And when you eliminate enough of these open loops, you're not just making your room look neater, you're giving your brain permission to release that cognitive tension and finally take a rest. But let's say you did the first steps and closed those loops, but when you walk into your living room, it still feels a little stiff. Kind of like the waiting room of an office, not a cozy home. Well, that usually means that you accidentally built yourself a showroom box. Because just look around most living rooms and you'll see the same pattern. A square room, a rectangular rug, a rectangular sofa, a rectangular TV, and a square coffee table. It's basically boxes inside boxes inside boxes. And sure, it looks orderly, but it feels rigid and maybe even a little hostile. And to understand why, we have to look at how human biology interacts with geometry. Because we tend to feel more at ease around curves and organic lines, and we're more on guard around hard, sharp angles. And that kind of makes sense, because in nature, you don't really see perfect 90-degree corners, but you do see sharp edges where things hurt, like thorns or jagged rocks. So when a room is nothing but straight lines and corners, your nervous system sees danger. Not enough danger for you to panic, but enough to put you on edge. But when you add in curves, it sends the opposite message, that this space is safe and approachable. Now, the good news is you don't need one of those trendy curved sofas or a total redesign of your living room. You just need to interrupt the grid a bit. So if your room is full of right angles, just ask yourself, where can I add a curve to break it up? And ideally, you want to aim for 3 to 5 rounded elements, which are layered on top of your boxy stuff. So for example, if you have a sofa with hard, square armrests, take a soft knitted blanket and just drape it over one side. Just like that, you've broken the grid. Or if you have a rectangular media console and a rectangular TV, don't hang a square piece of art next to them. Instead, choose a circular or other unusually shaped mirror and place that there instead. What you're doing is giving your eyes a place to land that doesn't end in a sharp point. You're tricking your brain's threat detection system into powering down. And when you look at a room that's done this, the transformation is kind of wild. It stops feeling like a geometry test and starts feeling warmer and softer without changing the primary furniture at all. So now you've closed the loops and added a few curves, and your room's really starting to look better. But then you look at your coffee table or your kitchen island, and even with all the right stuff, it still looks messy. You've got the nice candle, the marble coasters, and the beautiful coffee table book, but when they're scattered across the surface the way they are right now, it just doesn't feel styled. It kind of just looks like clutter. And here's why. Despite what you may believe, your brain doesn't experience a room as good looking or not good looking. It experiences it as work. Because every time you walk into a room, your brain scans what's in front of you and starts cataloging it. And the more separate items you see, the more mental energy it takes to process the space. And that mental energy is known as cognitive load. And similar to the browser tabs metaphor I mentioned a minute ago, when your brain is running on high cognitive load, it still runs, but everything feels slower and hotter than it should. And that's what's happening in your room. Because when you've got candle plus coasters plus matchbox plus TV remote plus coffee table books scattered across your table, your brain interprets them as 5 different things. And 5 isn't that big of a deal until you zoom out and realize that the entire room is full of all these little things. Pillows, frames, decor, lamps, baskets, they all really add up. And that's why your room feels visibly loud, even if it's clean. So the question is, how do you keep the things you use without your room feeling cluttered? And this is going to sound too simple, but it's what stylists do in literally every magazine shoot. You chunk them. Chunking is when your brain groups multiple items into a single unit. This is why phone numbers are broken into sections of 3 or 4 digits, because it's easier to process a couple of groups than a bunch of individual pieces. And in interior design, chunking looks like this. You take the exact same items, so the candle, the TV remote, the coasters, the matchbook, and the book, and you put them inside a boundary. So that could be a tray, a shallow bowl, a basket, or even a cutting board. Because the moment there's a boundary, your brain stops seeing 5 data points and starts seeing 1 vignette. And that's all without hiding anything. So you haven't become a minimalist and your TV remote is still right there, but now the surface actually looks good and your brain can relax because you've eliminated all that cognitive load. But you don't need to buy some pricey designer piece to pull this off. Just shop around your own home for something that can serve as that boundary. So if it's for your living room, you can place everything on a tray or inside of a decorative bowl. And if it's for your kitchen, you can place things like your salt, pepper, and olive oil on a nice cutting board instead of just loose on the counter. And if it's for your bathroom, then you can place your soaps and lotions on a small ceramic plate. The boundary here doesn't have to be fancy, it just has to tell your brain that these items belong together. And once you start doing this all across your home, your rooms won't just look tidier, they'll also feel quieter because you lowered the number of things that your brain has to hold on to at once. So now your room is physically soft, your cognitive load is low, and you've closed your open loops. And your room is really starting to come together. But what if you've done all that and the room still feels overwhelming? Like it's loud even when it's completely silent. Well, if you love art and bold design, there's a good chance that you're making the same mistake so many people make, which happens when you try to display all your favorite things at the exact same time. And it generally happens like this. You've got a colorful gallery wall, a geometric rug, a bright velvet sofa, and a heavily styled fireplace mantle. And even though you love every piece individually, when you put them all together, your eye doesn't glide through the room. Instead, it just pinballs around and your space starts to feel chaotic. And this is because of the von Restorff effect, which explains that our brains are wired to notice whatever stands out from their surroundings. It's an age-old survival feature that used to help us do things like spot red berries among the surrounding green leaves, because that contrast tells our brain that this matters. And it also explains why in a quiet, neutral room, one big statement piece works so beautifully. Because if you've got a huge blue painting set on a calm wall, your brain instantly knows where to look and you get a clear visual hierarchy. But what happens when everything is trying to stand out? When the rug is loud, the art is loud, the fireplace mantle is loud, and the sofa is loud, well, your visual hierarchy collapses. And I know you've heard me say this before, but when everything becomes a focal point, nothing is a focal point. It's like hearing your 5 favorite songs playing at the same time at the same volume. Even if every song is good on its own, together they just sound like noise and your brain wants out. So how do you calm the room down without getting rid of the pieces you love? Well, you just need to use a strategy I call active demotion, where you create a chain of command. Because just like a good rock band, a good room can only have one lead singer, and everyone else has to be a backup. So here's what you do. First, you need to choose an anchor. In a lot of rooms, the anchor is going to be a major feature, like a fireplace or a big window, but if you don't have an obvious anchor like that, it can also be the sofa, a large piece of art, or even a dining table if you're working with more of an open concept space. Second, you need to create visual silence around that anchor, which means clearing the loud decor nearby to create some negative space. This is what allows your focal point to have its voice heard. So if your fireplace is your anchor, you can't also have a cluttered mantle, a loud patterned rug right in front of it, and 2 big colorful pieces of art on either side, because that just suffocates the fireplace. But when you actively demote those other things by removing the art to create a calm surrounding wall and stripping down the mantle to 1 or 2 simple objects, the fireplace is now able to breathe. You didn't change the architecture at all. You just got rid of all the noise, and your brain finally gets what it's been begging for the whole time: one clear place to rest. But what if you look around your room at this point and it still feels disconnected? Like everything was bought from 5 different stores on 5 different days by 5 different people. You've got a nice sofa and a cool rug and a decent coffee table, and so nothing clashes, but nothing really connects either, and it just kind of feels like a random collection of items, not a cohesive room. Well, this is actually super common because most of us don't furnish a room in one day. We build our homes slowly over time, and that makes total sense. But you also need to recognize something. Your brain is a pattern recognition machine, and when it can spot a pattern, it feels calm because patterns mean predictability. But when it can't spot a pattern, there's this subtle sense of something's not quite right. And here's what that looks like in design. If your living room is neutral and you add 1 terracotta pillow, to your conscious brain, it feels like a pop of color. But to your subconscious brain, it feels like a random anomaly, some kind of visual glitch, because the color appears once and then nowhere else. There's no pattern. But if that same terracotta color shows up a few times across the room, your brain connects the dots. It stops seeing an accident and starts seeing an intentional move. And this is what I call the red thread, a subtle, repeating cue that gives your eye a map to follow. And no, you don't need to buy a matching furniture set. That's how you make your home look like a doctor's office. Instead, you want to do this. Step 1, choose an anchor color. So walk into your room and pick one of the colors in there. Maybe it's the olive in your rug, the mustard in a piece of art, or the terracotta in a vase. That's your anchor color. Step 2, add in 2 more instances of that color. So go into your bedroom, your office, your kitchen, or wherever, and find 2 more items in the same color family. They don't have to be identical matches, but they do need to be close enough that your brain notices they're related. So, for example, that might be a book with an olive spine, a ceramic bowl with that same mustard tone, or a throw blanket with a terracotta stripe. And then step 3, place them as a triangle across the room. So bring those 2 items into the same space and place them so your anchor color appears 3 separate times, spread out across the room. And the key is that you want to add them at different heights and in different zones. So if your first anchor color shows up in a rug on the floor, then you'll want to put your other items at a mid-height and a higher height so you get that triangulation. So maybe you add that color in through an object on your shelf or coffee table, and then again on a piece of art on the wall. And what that does is, when you stand in the doorway, your eye catches that anchor color and then naturally finds it again and again throughout the room. That's your red thread. But even at this point, there's still one problem everyone hits. When you try to apply all this to your own space, and you genuinely can't tell what's wrong, because it looks fine, but when a friend texts you and says, "I'll drop by in 5 minutes," suddenly you see your room like you've never seen it before. The awkward gap between the chairs, the stuff piling up in that corner, and you even notice that the art's hung too high. And you're like, how did I not notice this earlier? Well, it's actually not because you have bad taste. It's because you've got room blindness. And to explain room blindness, I need to explain a little bit more about how your brain works. Your brain is constantly trying to save energy. And one of the ways it does that is by filtering out environments that don't change. It's the same reason you stop feeling your watch a few minutes after you put it on, or why you stop noticing your own perfume but smell someone else's immediately. And your living room works the exact same way. That pile of magazines and the lamp that's a little too small, they've been there for so long that your brain stops labeling them as a mess or a bad layout. It just accepts them as the baseline. And the only reason you suddenly see it when someone's coming over is because the context changes. Your brain snaps out of autopilot and starts scanning again. So how do you see your room objectively without inviting someone over every time you need a reset? You use what I call the blackout test. Here's what you do. First, stand in the doorway to your room. Second, take a wide photo of the entire room. And then third, turn that photo black and white. We do this because the second you strip the color away, your brain can't get distracted by a pretty room anymore, and you force it to only see things like contrast, shape, and any other problems you've been ignoring. For example, in black and white, a pile of jackets doesn't look like a pile of jackets. It just looks like a dark, heavy mass that's pulling one side of the room down. Or you might realize that all your visual weight is on the left side of the room with a dark sofa, dark chair, and dark side table, while the right side of the room is much lighter. So the room starts to look like a seesaw. Or you'll spot that your art completely disappears because there isn't enough contrast, or it's floating too high with a big dead zone underneath. In other words, black and white basically turns your room into a map of shadows and structure, which is exactly what you need when you're stuck. And once you can see the room that way, the fixes become obvious. Things like repositioning a heavy piece of furniture to balance out the layout, or relocating or removing the clutter that's creating that dark blob. So you can run the blackout test anytime your room feels off, and you'll catch the invisible chaos before it builds back up. And by the way, if you want to get a step-by-step summary of everything I've talked about here in an easy-to-read format, I've put it in a doc at the link in the description. I'm testing out a bit of a new format for that, and I think you're gonna like it. But now that you understand how beautiful homes are designed, you're ready to move beyond the quick fixes. And the next step is learning a system to tie it all together. So watch this video next, where I'll teach you one of the design frameworks I've developed for turning boring, uninspiring rooms into spaces you love to spend time in.